Representative Phil Owens, District 5, Pickens County, mostly the Easley area.
B.R. Skelton, District 3, Clemson Central, 6 Mile and Norris.
I'm David Hyde, House District 4, Pickens and Dacusville, and Liberty. Thank you. The meeting of the Pickens County Legislative Delegation is just that. It's a meeting of the delegation. There'll be no public input. There'll be no exchange from the audience because this meeting is set to address one issue, which is the consideration of the structure of the Pickens County School Board. Should we decide to move forward, should we decide to make a change, should we decide to do anything in that degree, we will then hold a public forum, at which time we will allow input from everyone who wishes to do so before we actually move forward on any decision that the delegation makes. But because we are required to have open public meetings, which I'm glad we do, everyone's invited, but at this particular meeting, it will be a delegation meeting only among us. If you have questions, if you have concerns, and you wish to express those at the conclusion of our meeting, feel free to approach anybody and talk to them about anything you want to talk to them about. So I just want to let you know ahead of time, we're holding this meeting for that one purpose, which is a review of the Pickens County School Board structure. So with that being said, I will give I will explain kind of why, partially of why we're here last year, well, in last session year. Legislation was introduced by Representative Skelton and Representative Hyatt that would add an at-large member to the Pickens County School Board. We had a discussion at that time. That legislation was sent to the delegation as what they consider local legislation, although some would say we don't have such a thing in the House. Anyway, we decided and had a discussion among ourselves that we should hold a meeting to discuss, number one, do we need to make a change in the Pickens County School Board? Number two, if we do, which direction do we need to go? And one of the options was the one that was introduced, which was discussed, which was adding back an at-large member. Another option was going from 6 board members to 7 board members in a division so that each of the 7 members would represent an equal number of voters or people in that region. Instead of dividing up the county into 6 sections, divided up into 7 sections. That came about because we had input from those who felt like a 6-member board sometimes got caught up with a 3-3 tie and they needed to have an odd number. There was also a discussion of going to 5 members instead of 7 members. So that's the reason we're here today. And I'll just open up the floor to anybody on the delegation here that has any comments they'd like to make in that regard.
Well, I'll just begin. As the chairman said, in order to discuss this at all, we have to have an open forum, public meeting. If 3 of us were to get together and talk about it, it would be violating the Freedom of Information Act. So the purpose of this is to try to decide if there could be some sort of consensus. The way this works is, among us, we've always operated around building a consensus, but practically speaking, with the House and the Senate, you could have the delegation, the House delegation pushing one thing, the Senator pushing something else. We don't agree with it, it doesn't pass either body. So there isn't really need to have a big public discussion on something if we can't reach some sort of consensus. My frank opinion when the bill was introduced, and I voiced this at the time, I don't support reverting to an at-large scheme in the school board for a couple of reasons. One is, in 2007, I believe it was, we removed the 3 at-large seats after much discussion with the public here in Pickens County and amongst ourselves. All of us were involved in that decision. Nothing has really changed. That other members, we've got an extra member from Anderson now versus Powdersville. He really doesn't have a whole lot of sway one way or the other. It's basically the same players are involved in the discussion that we made a decision on back in '07. So I don't see changing that, or going back to something close to what we had back then, which was a discussion about, well, whether an at-large seat was a fair proposition or not because of where that person lived and what interests they represented and all that type of thing. Then this year, the discussion with the at-large seat, which I think is basically a reaction to whatever, public concern that maybe the 6th district even number, maybe they don't represent as closely as some folks would like the attendance areas. If you look at the map, the attendance areas, of course, when we drew 30 years ago, when we drew the 6 single-member district seats versus the 3 at-large seats, we had moved away from an at-large board. It was purely an at-large board prior to that time. You had 5 area trustees. Of course, Dakesville was counted as an attendance area at that time. But they had to live, they had to reside in the attendance area, but they ran countywide. And that was a problem. So then we went to the council district seats, because those districts existed. We didn't have the computer systems that we have today. I remember that very, very well, how difficult it was to reapportion back in those days. You just hung maps and pieces of maps up, and it was a very difficult thing to do. With computer systems, you can draw about anything. Matter of fact, it took all of probably 30 minutes to fit 7 seats within the 4 attendance areas. Years ago, that would have taken probably, a couple of days for somebody sitting down and doing that. So you can do it pretty quickly now. But my second reason for not supporting an at-large position is once you move away from an at-large seat, which is under the Voting Rights Act, is what the federal government prefers. And of course, there's another wrinkle in this whole thing. Up until this summer, we were under pre-clearance of the Justice Department. Section 5 no longer applies, but the Voting Rights Act still applies. We don't have to get prior approval for any changes we make, but the entire act, the Voting Rights Act and its application and its precedents, with the minor exception of pre-clearance, still applies. So in other words, the at-large situation would be reviewed by somebody to determine if we diminish
On federal level.
at the federal level. And a suit could possibly be filed. I was sharing with VR last night. My view of it, we were in a meeting together in Clemson. And I will say this publicly, my view of it is we could possibly be sued over a diminution of voting rights for 1 at-large seat being added. If we were reversing it, what we did 6, 7 years ago, putting back 3 at-large seats, we would certainly be sued. I got no doubt about that. Oconee County, if you remember just a few years ago, Senator Alexander reminded me of this, was threatened with a suit, not because their existing scheme was being challenged, and they went to single-member districts over in Oconee County just a few years ago because of the threatened lawsuit that they had. So I believe that we would be threatened with a suit if we pursued an at-large seat, and probably would be sued if we added. How that would work out, I don't know, but it would be it'd be pretty expensive. So the state would have to defend it. And my view of it is why even go there. The 6-6 tie on the school board, what I've always said about that, we have that with county council, and my view of that is 6-6. If you have a 3-3 vote on a 6-member board, it fails, whatever it is. So you have to have fortitude in order to do something. So, but I'll tell you the thing that resonated with me that I've heard from folks, particularly here in the Easley community, is they don't believe that the attendance areas are fairly represented. Now, every voter in Pickens County is represented by a school board member based on population, just like the county council. So there's no problem with the one man, one vote. But there is a problem with the attendance areas. About 68% of seat number 6 is in the Easley attendance area, but 32% of it is in the Pickens attendance area. And that's where the current school board member lives, is in the Batesville area, representing that area, and of course that goes with the Pickens attendance area. I don't think there's nobody questioning what the current, that's not to say anything about the current school board member per se, but if that flips this next time and a person from the Easley attendance area portion of that district is elected, then the whole Pickens attendance area would only be represented by one board member. And then it'd be 2 in Easley, 1 in Liberty, 6 Mile, and then the Clemson community would have 1 each. What I did in light of this whole discussion, I had a map drawn, and it's rough. These are not certified numbers. I had a map drawn with the precincts and asked that we keep the 7 seats as close within the attendance areas, understanding that I didn't want to split precincts. And if you put the 7 seats within the 4 attendance areas based on the recent census.
Now, the addition of the 7th seat was simply in response to those who said an even number
And
the attendance area. So basically it was, okay, you know, and I agreed with adding that 7th seat because, or either 5 or some odd number is normal. We're having our discussion.
Yeah.
But, and then found out that we really only had, I think, maybe 4 tied votes. And all of those were worked out, that were actually 3-3. I don't know, have you guys heard any different?
No.
I've only heard that in some occasions, one person just wouldn't vote so that there could be a result, which I don't think is a very good idea.
Okay. So that was the reason I considered 7 would be, people said, you know,
well,
you have a tie vote with 3-3. The only thing I would agree to on 7 was that they all be exactly equal, completely represented by the same number.
This is.
So you drew this in there.
Yeah, and this is plus or minus 4%. Matter of fact, I asked the state stenographer on a school board situation like this, what kind of variance would they tolerate? The reason there's a variance at all, you can get it down to exactly equal districts. But the
Not
reason,
if you have precinct boundaries.
yeah, I got precinct boundaries, and what I tried to do, and you see around the edges of the map, the precinct up there, I don't know the names, I don't have the names of these precincts, but.
So the 7 are the colors, the different colors.
Yeah,
Right? 1, 2, 3, 4.
and you'll see the way it was done. I told them, I said, let's draw this thing in such a way that we keep as much of whole districts as possible without splitting precincts within the attendance areas. And what I was able to come up with was just a few precincts that sort of go in and out of the lines because, you know, got to go one place or the other if you don't cut them.
What are these dark black lines?
The dark black lines are the attendance areas.
Okay.
Those are the school attendance areas. And those don't change that often. The board changes that occasionally based on whatever need they have regarding the sizes. But they had, how long's it been, Jicky?
The last time the attendance line was changed was when Dacusville High School was eliminated.
Okay.
You didn't change the line, you used to race the line.
Just to race the line.
Back to 70, 71.
And that goes with Pickens area now, and what?
Pickens Elementary, when we put in that new elementary up there, we changed the lines
Yeah.
when I was on board.
But the attendance lines don't change for purposes of an election. They would only change for some reason associated with the school capacity issue or something like that. The school attendance lines, and of course, keep in mind, with the precincts, not trying, if we could draw a map that would, just like the council could draw a map. That what the council did when it drew its map, the 6 seats. And it's obvious to me, they tried to minimize any impact on the precinct splitting. And the reason you do that, obviously, you don't want, when you have people going into the same precinct, you want them voting, if you can, the same people in the same elections. That's the reason you can easily go to 7 seats and keep 6 seats for county council, because we don't have anything to do with that. That's under state law. And wherever these people live, it will determine if they're all in the same precinct. Everybody in that precinct, when they go vote, with the 7 school board seats, if it were drawn that way, versus the 6 council seats. I know that some people say, well, that would be confusing. Well, everybody in that precinct, when they go vote, will be voting in the same election. They won't be voting, well, I got to vote. My neighbor across the street voting in the same precinct would be voting in school board seat 1. Neighbor across the street voting in the same precinct would be voting in school board seat 2. So we eliminated that possibility with the variances, plus or minus 4%. And the state demographer told me that the Voting Rights Act would tolerate probably up to 10% on a map like this for purposes of a variance, and we kept it under 5. And again, these are rough.
Looking at the map, Senator Larry.
Yeah.
Really, the only, there are some minor changes, but really the only thing we're doing is basically adding a seat in Easley.
Well, what you're doing, you're doing 2 things. You're adding a whole seat in the Easley attendance area as opposed to 70% of the existing seat. And you're also keeping a seat in the Pickens attendance area. If with the way it's currently drawn with 6, you're going to flip one way or the other. It's going to be either Pickens will pick up or Easley will pick up that what's called the Dacusville seat. It's been called Dacusville seat since my friend from Dacusville was elected. Although it's not a Dacusville seat, and I told the folks here in Easley that said, well, we're not represented. I said, well, but you are. I mean, you got 70%, almost 70% of the folks that are in that Pickens area seat live in the Easley attendance area. So, you know, what this would do is ensure that the Pickens attendance area and the Easley attendance area both have 2 seats. If you leave it the way it is with 6, one of them's going to pick up 1 depending on who runs and is elected. Now, Daniel is still going to basically have the Daniel attendance area is still going to basically have 2 because of the heavy population down in Clemson with the student population. Liberty is going to essentially have 1 based on its population. But the difference will be between Pickens and Easley, depending on who runs and who's elected. Then Pickens would have his 1, Easley would have 2. Well, actually, Easley could have 3 under the current configuration, and Liberty would have none. Under the 7-seat proposal, Liberty is likely always to have 1.
It always boils down to where the candidate
Where the candidate comes from.
You can't draw an exact, so you got a little finger, this Pickens district has a little finger that comes down into Liberty. If the person lives there and they're elected, then they're gonna, you know, they're gonna be representing the Pickens part of it. You got these little fingers, it all depends on who runs and who's elected. That's the bottom line. Easily could have two, or they could have three. Liberty could have two, or Pickens could have two or three. I mean, it could go all around. It just depends on who it is.
Well, it does, you
You
know,
know, if you get someone to run here, that they live here and are elected,
well,
let's see what's gonna happen.
right now, Ben Trotter's, the so-called Liberty seat, his actual residence is in the easily attendance area.
So what determines whether you can run for a seat or not?
You live in
The attendance area?
no,
You
the
live in,
current,
On the sixth.
and you couldn't do that. You couldn't by law unless the district is wholly within that attendance area. And that's what the 7-seat configuration that I've drawn more clearly, closely aligned with 7 did. You can't put in statute that you got to reside in that attendance area if portions of that area, of that seat, is drawn outside that. You can't do that.
it seems to me, I may be wrong, we're getting the cart before the horse. We're talking about adding seats when we haven't decided whether that's what we want to do or not.
Well, that's probably what I mean.
And so the thing we need to do is decide whether we want to go to an odd number of seats, and I don't care whether it's 5 or 7 or 9 or 13. But that's what we need to decide, and then I really don't care. It doesn't bother me how we get there, whether it's at-large or not. I don't worry so much about a suit from an at-large thing, because I believe all of us voted for the voter ID knowing that there was going to be a suit, and there was, and we won it.
Which we won.
And I don't see how in the world you can come up with racial discrimination with an at-large seat. And so I don't worry about that aspect of it, but I think the crucial thing we need to decide now is, are we going to go forward with a change in the composition of the school board? And then I don't think we're going to have a real problem in coming up with how to do it.
Well,
What we need to decide today is do one or two things. Do we leave it like it is, or do we make a change? As to what that change is, I don't want us to decide until we hear from a public forum from people, and we say, we may be leaning one or two ways, or we may be going with 7, or we may go at large, or whatever, but I want to hear through a public forum.
I agree.
So
And
what
so, do we then need a motion that we change the composition of the school board?
Well, we just need to decide if we
Or
want.
are we going
If
to,
we want to put together.
Hold that motion if you're fixing to make it, if you don't mind. I got a couple of questions.
okay?
If you were planning on making that motion, I ask you to hold it.
I don't know whether it's even appropriate for us to entertain a
Well,
motion
well,
until after we get
well,
public input.
let me just say this. I made it very clear I cannot support an at-large seat. If the motion is just to move to 7, it depends on what the 7 is. I'm not going to support an at-large seat. And-
I don't want to vote on moving to 7 until I hear from the public.
Well, no.
Well, I don't want to vote to make a change. What I want us to decide today is, do we feel like we're at the point where we need to invite the public to come in and tell us how they feel about whether they want to change it?
My question is this, how much does this cost the state or the county to redo this?
All right, cost would be the voter registration cards. I've asked Rodney with the election commission. I said, what would be the cost of changing to,
Good question.
and that is, there is a cost. I mean, you'd have to reissue voter registration cards for every voter in the county, which was just done last year. So that's about 30, I think you told me, mailing cost and all, because they wind up printing cards anyway. The mailing cost would be around 30 to 35,000. that's essentially the cost.
Who would pay that?
Either the school district and or the county and or a combination of the two.
All right, so we have decided there is a cost.
There is a cost.
But let's, for round figures, let's use $30,000.
Right.
If we go to the at-large seat, is there a cost?
I wouldn't think so, because you wouldn't have to reissue the voter registration card.
Okay.
And that's one thing we could do.
So the question is, what we can decide, you know, so we said, do we want to move forward, and the next step is to have a public forum to hear, to get input from those who want, if they feel one way or the other.
And I move that we do that.
All right, I'm good with that.
You got a second?
Second.
Any opposition?
Hmm.
Okay. So we'll do that as soon as possible before we go back, because we'd like to try to have all this laid out before we get back in January.
When would this take effect, if it were to pass?
We could
Either way.
Yeah, we could implement it we could implement anything next year.
For the 2014
Yeah,
election.
and they would, if we passed it in January, and that's as early as it could be signed into law, when we go back in January, it would become effective immediately, and barring no lawsuit and joining it from becoming effective, the voter registration folks would immediately begin the process of implementing. They'd have plenty, because it's nonpartisan, it would be for the November election.
Yeah. And since there's no pre-clearance, we don't have to wait the 6 or 8 months or so that it takes to get pre-clearance on
No.
things, so
No.
it can be done.
No. But my view of it is that it'd probably best let the public weigh in on it. We've already heard from some folks, and the only comment that I would make as we lead up to this and having a public forum on it is there's been a suggestion made that this is about electing more of a variety of folks of a political persuasion. If that is the case, I want to know who those people are. I'd like to know who, get some names out there as to who these people are that are going to be elected to fill these so-called seats. Because I don't know that we don't have the authority to put anybody's name on any seat. And my view of it is the voters in those election districts, be they 6 or 7, will make a decision as to who represents them on the school board. And I don't know who it is that is preordained they're going to be Democrat, Republican, liberal, or conservative. And if they can say that, I want the names of who these people are that's already been selected to take these seats.
I've received some correspondence from some folks that said this was a reaction to some of the things that have been going on in the school district now. I just simply say that this bill was filed much earlier than before any of this action took place at the school district with the 2 middle schools. And this piece of legislation was filed back in February, I believe. Representative Skelton and I talked about it back in February, and it's not a response or reaction to anything anybody's done in the current administration, because my personal feeling is that even when we cut it from 9 to 6, my personal feeling has always been it should have been odd number. I mean, that's just my personal opinion, and that's the reason I went along with Representative Skelton when he came to me and asked me to sign on with it. I've always thought it should have been an odd number anyway, and that's my personal feeling, whether it be 5, 7, whatever. And I've talked to both of you folks about that.
I had a number of calls and a number of conversations with constituents, and whether it is 5 or 6 or 7. Again, the bottom line is who you get elected, where they come from. We can change the maps and we can draw this, but it doesn't matter. It's who you get elected. If you're not happy with the board members then you need to have somebody else elected. If you're not happy with us, you need to have somebody else elected. It depends on who you get out there, identify, and get behind, and get them elected. All these problems are solved through the election process. That's my opinion, so, and that's what I,
Are we gonna make this map available before
Yeah,
our
we
meeting?
need to do that. I would recommend go ahead, and I've emailed it to some people, and we'll give it to the media for them to look at it. And again, everybody understand this is just a suggestion. And the reason I suggested it was, as much as anything, it does more closely identify with the attendance areas. And there seems to have been a discussion about that. And again, about the biggest area impacted on the map, if you look at it, the biggest area impacted on the map is the Pickens, Easley attendance areas. Because what will happen with the 6 seats, depending on where the seat 6 person lives, Easley will have 2, and Pickens will have 1, or vice versa. And in Easley's case, it is the biggest attendance area. They're 38,000 people out of the county's population, and they wind up, because of that configuration, it bears no relationship at all to the attendance area. But the 7-seat map does. It does bear a relationship to the attendance area. And it more closely aligns the seats, which the county council map can't do by definition. It can't do it by number, and it can't do it because the folks, us, or the school district has nothing to do with how the council seats are drawn. That's entirely a function of county council. So they bear no relationship at all to the school board attendance areas.
okay, so we've decided, Barbara, will you find us a date and a place you want, where you want to have it? You want to have it here, you want to have it?
Probably I'll use one of the high school auditoriums, I would assume, try to pick a spot, either Liberty or Pickens or Easley, it doesn't matter.
Okay. Barbara, find out
When we were
I'm sure they'd let us
when
use.
we were discussing 9 members down to 6, and we had that public meeting, it's pretty well attended, so we
Yeah.
probably need,
that was at the old Liberty.
that was at Liberty High School.
Middle school.
Liberty Middle, yeah.
We don't use that in that kind of middle of the,
I don't believe it's there anymore.
well, we'll find something. We'll make a public announcement in the paper and all that stuff. We'll set a date. Check with all our calendars and submit stuff. Well, that was only an item of business. Do we have anything else?
Mr. Chairman, this is just, I gave everybody a copy of that just for their information, something historic. Larry, I put yours.
Oh, the historical
Society's request.
Yeah, about naming the,
Yeah.
and I have sent that to they want to name the waterways on the roads, and I sent that to Stephen Henderson out at the DOT. He promised to
We
send
have
it
to
on.
we have to take action on that.
That's just for your information.
Thank you, David. All right, no other business.
All right?
We're adjourned.